Hey, Julian. You got audio?
Hold on.
I can hear you now.
There we go. Yeah, I was just hanging out in the Discord. Have you been on that?
Huh?
Have you been on the Discord?
No.
Oh, it's a bloody time suck. Stay out.
What happens on there?
It's so much fun. It's just too much fun. There's they've got like a whole bunch of sub channels, and there's this constant stream of conversation. Probably 50 plus people online at all times, and there's this this thing where you can this channel where you can just talk, and then there's almost 5 people just having a voice chat conversation.
Right.
Then you can have DMs. It's a great thing.
Yeah. What kind of group were you in?
Oh, that's the Paul Vanderklay channel.
Oh, there's one on there?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, you must
link to it.
It's a time suck. So watch out.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That's cool. So how's it been?
Pretty good. You mean on the Discord or life in general?
Just life in general. Like, where do you live at? Are you in the States?
No, Canada, Manitoba.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Western Manitoba, which is out in the sticks somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the plains.
Yeah, prairie all around. There was once a guy from Germany here, and I remember taking him around the colony, just giving him a tour.
Yeah.
We got to, like, there's this ring road that goes around. Then we were walking on that, and then he suddenly looked up, and it was like just pure prairie as far as he could see. This was winter, so there were hardly any trees, just pure white, and he was just blown away because in Germany there's always mountains, but he's never seen anything so flat.
Right. Yeah, it's flat. Well, I live in Kansas, so
same thing.
Yeah, there's a few hills, not too many though.
We love our hills.
Yeah, hills get names around here.
Yeah, if you travel maybe if you travel an hour or two from here, you start to get into some really wooded, hilly country.
Yeah,
it's nice.
Nice. Cool, man. Well, do you have any idea what we want to talk about?
I'm actually recording. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's totally good.
Yeah, yes. I thought maybe we could throw it on the Randos channel if it's any good. Or
yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Now that since I've had 2 conversations, I'm banned from talking.
Oh yeah. You were piling them on, weren't you?
Well, every time I could get a slot, I would get one. And actually, we had another conversation that we never posted just because I didn't think. I ended up talking about some of my friends, and I don't know. It got a little bit personal, so I never posted it. But
your conversations have always been pretty personal in some way, I think.
Yeah, that's kind of how. Yeah.
But you've had 3, not 2. There was the one on Job.
There was Job, and there was
the one on your story, and there was the one on the Zizek Peterson debate.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I really love it.
3 then, right?
I've had 3.
Yeah.
I'll settle down for now.
Yeah. Well, I guess what we have in common is kind of some of the stuff we've been talking about, postmodernism, and maybe that's kind of a jumping off point. Like, what did you think about the Zizek debate, and or just about?
Yeah, I was intrigued by it. I guess I haven't looked into that much of Zizek, so.
Oh, you weren't familiar with him?
No, I was just like, this guy is interesting. What the hell is he talking about? Kind of.
Right. Right.
Yeah, he's such a confusing character, but endlessly fascinating, I guess.
Well, he's always like poking at all the right spots when it comes to like modernity and religion.
Yeah,
all that stuff. so like I was really into Zizek for years and years before I ever came across Peterson. And you know, I was listening. I was trying to figure out what Marx was all about and all that, because it's kind of where some of my friends were going, and so just trying to remember what exactly. Yeah, I just thought it was really interesting because it wasn't like either Peterson or Zizek slam dunked on each other. It was really nice exchange where Peterson was definitely more the modernist and more the conservative, and Zizek was definitely kind of, you know, like Paul's impression that he got of it was Zizek kind of like a clown.
How did you
fun and,
what did you think of that? Because I listened to a conversation between Zizek and a guy called Will Self, and maybe that was just the conversation, but I was like, you are such a nihilistic pessimist or something.
Zizek is a pessimist?
That was for sure. Yeah, well, definitely. Did you see that conversation? Will Self and Zizek. Yeah, I think this is from 2019. It was just so hopeless.
Really?
Yeah, horribly hopeless.
Yeah, that's the problem with like a lot of this. Well, the nihilism is the thing that really like does in the whole postmodern project. Like it's unlivable. Like that's kind of like my impression of everything. Like I was into Pete Rollins for a while.
Yeah.
He was heavily influenced by Zizek and Lacan, and then so I got into Zizek, and I tried to get into Lacan, but Lacan's so strange, and I could never make sense of like anything. And so, I mean, I talked about it with Paul when we had our conversation, and it was just like the nihilism is kind of like the point where you're like, oh, this is not sustainable. It may have been a medication for the problems that modernism and the rigid structures that modernism and then how Christians got involved with modernism and the theologies and everything was just so tightly wound. The postmodern came in and kind of loosened it all up. But then everything just got too loose. You can't live in that either. It's like that order chaos thing. And so when Peterson was talking about order chaos, I was like, oh, this is it. Because I was like, postmodernism's too chaotic, and then modernism's too tight, you know.
So how did you get into someone like Zizek and Rollins? Is this like your first foray into this world, or were you sort of backing in through other people?
Well, I was like, I'm high in openness.
Okay.
And so but I grew up evangelical Christian. Is the background noise too much?
A bit, but I can deal with it.
Hey guys, quiet. They're playing with finger skateboards and like.
Jesus, calming the storm.
Stop. So I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, I was asking how you got into Zizek, and you said you were high in openness.
So I was just evangelical Christian, and that whole like evangelicalism is strange because it's got that modernism in it, so it's really a tightly bound system that you can't talk about. So like the main thing that like Peter Rollins kind of helped me was that like, within the evangelical system, it's all about faith and belief. You have to believe, you have to have faith. And then Peter Rollins comes along and says, no, talk about your doubts. And you're like, oh, that's actually helpful when I talk about my doubts, because like no one talks about their doubts, and there's no place to talk about doubts. And so so that was helpful because it provided a space to talk about that stuff that wasn't available at, you know, that we did on the side, but it wasn't a part of church or anything. Like we talked about it like as we were like having dinner or with a friend or something.
And this whole status thing is also a part of it, where you know, within this tribe, the more confident and the more firm you are, the higher status you have. And if you're too open about these things, your status will drop. So there's these dynamics, which I'm always I definitely see the downsides in not being able to voice your doubts. I mean, that's obviously not something you can live with, but I wonder, what would a, you know, postmodern, open, doubting, exploring church actually look like? And is that actually something I would want to be a part of, where it's like everybody is always engaged in this sort of negative, deconstructive process? And you know, the sermons are always, I can just hear the sermons. They're like, there's no substance to it. It's just be happy with your doubts and don't be too certain about anything, which I need to hear that part of me, but I wouldn't want to be at a church where everyone thinks that way, I guess.
Well, that's what happens on these online groups. So like in the Rollins groups I've been a part of, and then even like the liturgists groups, I don't know if you heard about them, but they're always talking about deconstruction and how positive it is. Now, if you're coming out of something so tightly bound, then that's a good thing. And so people receive the benefits of that, and then they talk about it and they praise the idea of always deconstructing. The problem is that it's just not sustainable. And the groups just becomes silly after a while, because everyone's just talking about, then you have to have faith in deconstruction. And like as you say, I think I found something I can build on now, something solid that I can't deconstruct. They're like, yeah, right. You can deconstruct that too. And you're like, no, I think I'm actually, like, by deconstructing, I'm actually being motivated by a part of myself that I don't want to, you know, like my deconstruction is motivated by like a bad side of me, like that I want to go and just do whatever I want. Like I want to, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It rationalizes some kind of behavior that I want to do. And so you're like, maybe I shouldn't be doing, you know, like then you start deconstructing why you're deconstructing and start questioning why you're questioning. And then you're like, oh, I'm kind of running from something, and I'm kind of hiding from something, and I know something that I'm trying to deny. You know, you start getting into that area, and people don't want to hear that, because you're like, because like in the groups, like about the time when I was starting to find things like that were more solid, I was like, what about this? What about this? What about this? And they're like, yeah, that just sounds like legalistic fundamentalist mumbo jumbo. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, listen to me. And they wouldn't listen, because maybe they're coming out of like a tightly bound system. But I was already in loosey goosey land, and I was trying to like find some sort of place I could live that wasn't a prison camp or just nothingness.
Wow. It's deconstruction. How do you think you've arrived somewhere right now, or are you still deconstructing?
No, I mean, deconstruction's like it's like a tool you can use. Find yourself too bound up within something, but it's not like something that you can live in, like
for sure.
Like I went through a study on Genesis, and like when God creates the world, it's like he creates spaces, and the reason why he fills the spaces, so he separates light from dark, so he creates this division between lightness and darkness. Then what lives in that? The sun and the moon live in those spaces. Okay. And then he separates the waters from the waters above to the waters below, and then separates the waters below into the waters in dry land.
Oh, okay.
And then in each of those spaces, things live.
Yes.
So fish live in the sea, Leviathan lives in the deep, animals and plants live on the land, birds live in the sky, the heavenly, like
Nice.
everything is filled. So a space gets created so that something can thrive and live within it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't make the spaces too rigid, or else like this gets into all Peterson stuff about tyranny, and like if you try to keep it so rigid that it ends up being a tyrannical system, and it becomes unlivable by its tyranny. So things can't work anymore if they're unable to, if there's nothing being able to flow between. But if there's no boundary, like if there's no boundary between the sea and the land, everything becomes sea. There's no land anymore, you know? And so there has to be a boundary somewhere. And then at that boundary, there has to be some sort of fluidity. And this is like Peugeot talks about this when he talks about the margins and the edges.
Yeah.
And so there's a center, like the center is Christ. Things come out from the center, and there's things on the edges. And the dangers is that, replacing the center was like if the edges try to creep in to take over the center, that's bad. Or if the center tries to bring everything in and lock it all down within itself, and then it's also not good, because so everything has to have its place, and it has to be aligned to, and so you see this just on every scale. So like every space that God created has its own ecosystem, and then it interacts with the ecosystems around it, and those live within a larger space. And like everything's interacting in the line, but not everything is just like postmodernism tends. I feel like everything just gets so loose that the boundaries disappear, and everything just starts. Then it's just soup. You have a stew, and everything becomes the sea because there's no boundary between,
Yeah. So here's another way, another thing to explore is, so in my mind, what happens in modernity is have this universal story of some kind where everybody has to fit into this, and these are it's this domineering, tyrannical, shove everything into this box type of system.
Right.
Postmodernism, in my mind, sort of undermines that by saying, this is the, there are no meta narratives. We are incredulity towards meta narratives type of deal. And so once you accept that there are no meta narratives, where do you go from there? You sort of can't go back to this universal story, but you don't want to stay in this deconstructive soup either. So the way I see it, you sort of have to, and Nick on Paul's channel has talked about this, you sort of get into this pluralistic cultic frame where there's different meta narratives, so maybe different narratives on who are sort of just vying for power. That's sort of escape. You have to find yourself within.
Right, but what's interesting, and I got this from Peugeot, is that the postmodern flip from the margin becomes the top, and the top becomes the margin, and this whole flip that's part of that's within the larger meta narrative, that flip. So like, and Christ embodies part of this, and so like Peter Rollins and stuff, they really latch on to the ways Christ is flipping things. So like, he's poor, marginalized, he's crucified, he dies, all this stuff, which is all the stuff the evangelicals kind of ignored for years, or at least from my perspective. But the other side of it is that they ignore how he's king, he gets glorified, he is lifted above everything, he has the name above all names, all these things that the evangelicals are glad to say, but all the postmodernists,
inversion of all things, this sort of irrational, going against the norms of the world type of deal, which, yeah, that's something that attracts me, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I think it's useful at times, and I think it is the case sometimes that's, I mean, Peugeot likes to talk about how strange the times we live in and how everything's upside down. Like we're experiencing it, like it's a reality. It's not necessarily, but can you always live in a time like this where everything's flipped upside down? No, eventually things settle to where something's at the top and something's at the bottom, or something's at the margin. Like you end up settled in a place like that, and then what do? Like, I mean, can you just keep flipping it? Did you just, I mean, are you just a wheel now?
You could say that the constant flipping of the wheel is what keeps history moving forward.
Right, but see, that's within the larger narrative of kingdoms come and kingdoms go, but God remains.
Mm-hmm.
Like this flipping is happening while something's sitting on top, watching the flip. Something like that.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Where like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've come out of I've definitely come out of the nihilism. I've come out of the whole postmodern exploration, like seeing its benefits, but not necessarily, it's just not livable long term. It's you eventually have to, I don't know, and maybe it's just me getting older too.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's I don't know if I have this sort of rigorous definition of deconstruction, where it's like I mean, what seems to be a part of what you're articulating through Rollins is that you're not just deconstructing. I don't think you also said Rollins isn't really operating from Derrida's version of deconstruction. He's doing something a bit different. Is that right? And
I think so.
Yeah, and because I think what Derrida does is, this is also, he sort of takes something and then tries to find its opposite within it and then undermines it in that way or something. And I guess maybe this is sort of the forerunner and the known, sort of, where you find the foreigner within the known, and then maybe it's something like that. But what seems to be a part of what you're saying through Rollins is that you're also sort of exploring your motivations. Like, why am I holding this belief? What are my true motivations, which I'm not completely aware of, and exploring that. That's not really what I find this state I find myself in. What I find myself in is I sort of start from, I guess it's more like trying to get a bigger sense of what Christianity is, and having to let go of certain things, which is pretty much with everyone who grows up with a bit of a narrow version of the larger tradition and the larger story. You have to let things go, and that's sort of what I mean by deconstruction. That's what I have in mind with deconstruction, is being able to have enough faith to open yourself up to what's outside of your current frame. And it's just something I have to do, because there's just so much space to grow in.
That was my experience too, and that was extremely formative for me, being able to let go and but you let go into something, like something you'll land somewhere, because like you don't just float. Like,
well, there, I think there's some kind of a deconstruction in Kierkegaard, where his notion of faith is holding fast to Christ and then venturing. And that's how I see what I'm trying to do. Is I sort of take this this rock and this presupposition which I hold on to, and then I venture. So for me, it's always a movement of faith, which and I do sort of see some kind of a providence in it, where it seems like it's going somewhere, which
it's some sort of meta narrative.
I mean it's just like when I look back at what's been going on in my intellectual journey, it seems to follow some kind of a logic. It seems like things have popped into my awareness at the right time. And maybe this is something you see too when you look back at your own story. It seems like something coherent has emerged, and something providential.
That's what I'm talking about. That's the rock that you find after you've deconstructed, or after you like you'll land somewhere or something, or you'll fall into a hand, and you're like, oh, this is something that's not my delusions, or like it could. I mean, you can even, like, in a really secular way, you can think of it as just like, what happens if I let go of all my beliefs? What happens to me if I'm paying attention and I venture out? Well, you end up encountering reality.
Yes.
Now, obviously, there's all this interpretive process that you're doing as you're encountering it. You can't encounter it completely, but you encounter it, and that's something, and then you can start to figure that out. And so it's not like, and I mean, the postmodernists just want you to continually like question everything that you encounter, like everything that's real, and like there's some wisdom in that. Like, obviously you want to think about things, like you don't just accept whatever your first thought is about something. That's kind of obvious, but the other side of it is you just can't take it to its extreme, where you're just like, or at least I can't. I never found a way to make that livable. Like, you gotta.
It's unsettling. It's very unsettling. Just to live in that world, which maybe this was your experience too, but here's an example. Like, take the notion of scriptural interpretation, and there comes this point when you realize, your tradition's interpretation of scripture is an interpretation, and that there are all other valid ways of interpreting it. And so you run into the Protestant dilemma of authority, right? So that's one step of it. And then you run into this notion of, okay, so when I'm interpreting scripture, what am I actually trying to do? Am I trying to get back to the original meaning, where I look at what the early church was, and do I try to conform as well as possible to that? Or, and this is something a friend of mine brought up recently, where, take the Jerusalem Council, for example. Maybe you've heard about this, but if you actually look at what happens there, it's quite profound, because suddenly, with no precedent in 2,000 years of Jewish history, and only with what happened with Jesus Christ, they suddenly decide, we don't need to keep the Mosaic laws. We don't need to be circumcised, which was like, this is really important for the Jews. Suddenly, this group of people decides, we're not going to do that. And there's literally two sides who are arguing here. There's one who's, both are firmly trenched, and one side has much stronger arguments because they've got the whole canon behind them. And the question that raises for me is there a forward movement, or are you always trying to get back to the original church? And once you sort of get into that frame, the whole thing, you suddenly lose your grip on the text, because it's like, it's my subjective interpretation, and what is my subjective interpretation? Is it going forwards, or is it going backwards? It's so what's the word? Unsettling, I guess. But also,
Yeah. I was just thinking about this because I was listening to Paul Vanderklay talk with John Vervaeke. Did you watch that yet?
That was good.
Yeah, it was really like their second talk. I think it's their second one. Mm-hmm. And he talked about, I don't know if this is part of this, but he talked about how there's eminence, which is like the transcendent, and then there's emergent.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so eminence is like top down, like God.
Revelation.
God, yeah, gives revelation or creates the world. And then emergence is like things emerging from the bottom. So this is like evolution. This is like maybe consciousness emerging out of biological whatever.
What? Hold on. What do you think Vervaeke means by the top down thing?
I don't know.
Well, they were talking about the two aspects of God, which
because he talks so eloquently, like he knows what God is or how God works.
Yes.
But he doesn't necessarily believe in God.
It might be something like intuition for him, maybe.
Right. Or even wider, just like whatever the force is behind the world or reality that makes it become or be or whatever.
It would sound more like,
I don't know.
Well, maybe you could look at it sort of, think about the movement of history, like what's pushing it forward and what's the potential they were also talking about the structure of potential, where some things come into existence, or this stuff is past my being read.
Well, anyway, back.
Yeah.
But he said something that was really interesting that caught my attention, and it was he said, in the cause and effect of things, if eminence is causing it, whatever it causes is lesser than itself because it's immanent. So the effect is lesser than the cause. Now in emergence, that's opposite. In emergence,
okay,
the effect is greater than the cause.
Can I put my own, how I interpret that was, it's actually I think what he was distinguishing there is sort of the theistic versus the naturalistic view, where it's for the naturalist, it's effect causes how does this go? It's the most real thing causes the less real thing, versus the naturalist view is
the less
real thing brings the most real thing into existence. It's the evolution goes that way, where one is the world is conforming more to God, and the other is the world is becoming God. Something like that.
Right. But I think they were talking about them both working together, which, or at least maybe I'm missing. Anyway,
yes,
how I took it was that, like, you can see the art incarnation in this because the eminent becomes the emergent and then rises up, and this is like, and I just had the funny thought, I'm like, is this what glory is, where the eminent becomes the emergent, rises up and becomes greater? Because like when he comes down, he's less than what he was. Okay, so you think if it's going this direction from eminent down, effect is greater than the cause. Or the cause is greater than the effect. So whatever the cause is greater than the effect. So Christ comes down, becomes less.
Yes.
All right. But then as he goes down to not only to earth, but he dies, goes to hell,
the pit,
death. He goes to the very bottom and then emerges.
Bringing the key is, though, this is a profound thing. He brings heaven to earth. No, he brings earth to heaven also, in a way.
Right. But as he goes up, then that rule applies that the cause or the effect is greater than the cause in this. So all of a sudden it has a chance for this is the only way that the eminent can become greater.
Yes, I would agree. Yes.
So I'm just thinking and this is something I got out of the book of Job, was that God is only concerned with glory. And before I really studied Job, when people would say that, I'd be like, that sounds like the most idiotic thing, the most hubristic kind of
I see where
proud. You're only concerned with your glory. Great, this is awesome. I love this place where there's this God who only cares about how much praise he gets. But the thing is like, if you think about God's like, I only want things to be greater. And the only way things will get greater is if I incarnate myself. And so,
the earth needs to reflect God more is essentially the point.
But this is even like, maybe even a reason why God wanted to create in the first place. He's like, I need something specific so I need to create the earth, something lesser, so that something greater can be made. The relationship between God and earth is greater than just God by himself.
But because of love?
Right. Or just because of, like, God just wants things to be greater. He wants things to be more glorious.
Yes.
And so if this is going to happen, like if this is so by going down, he becomes less, but coming up, he becomes greater. So this is the only way for the eminent to become greater, to go through this process. So this is the eternal process of God sending his son into the earth, the word, the logos, and through that something glorious happens. Something great happens. So this is like, you're trying to think of like, what's God's motivation in doing any of this? You're like, well, that's the motivation. And then there's all this pain and suffering that happens with going from eminence to down to the bottom and then trying to emerge up. There's pain and suffering and all this sort of stuff that all of us go through, and some people to greater degrees than others. And God promises, he's like, I promise I will justify all of the pain. Everything that you sow will come up and you'll be able to reap it. Like I'm going to make everything worth it. Every seed that gets planted will grow up and you will have a harvest. And so like, that's a tall order, because we know the atrocities that happen in the world. And so that's where like faith and hope comes in, because you're like, oh, God says he's going to do this, and there could be a chance he could pull it off, so that's the promise is new heavens, new earth, going from glory to glory to glory to glory. And this even fits with like the Orthodox idea of us becoming more and more like God, more and more like Christ. And
this idea of humans, or of the ultimate purpose of creation, is to reflect God's, to bring glory to God. This, you just put an amazing spin on this, because you often hear, what is the purpose of your life what is the purpose of humanity? And people say something like to bring glory to God. And that always triggers me a bit, because
it triggers me
like such a lame answer. Because I think what I get from people like the Bible Project is the real purpose of humanity is to reflect the image of God. But you're saying that's actually the same thing, because the ultimate purpose is that, the eminent will be filled more with the presence of God, that it becomes more like God, that it becomes, ultimately you have union. And then, so you have this notion in Genesis of being made in the image of God. And that is, it can be seen, it's best seen as a vocation, where you're supposed to be the reflection of God on earth, or you're supposed to bring glory to God. You're supposed to manifest glory. And then the whole Old Testament story is people failing, and also people who come very close to reflecting the image of God. So you have like people like Moses, or people like David, or people like which are all pretty messed up also, but whatever.
Right.
Like,
Abraham. Yeah. All the fathers. And
yeah. And yes, Abraham is also a good example. And then what happens with Jesus is that you have a human being who so reflects the glory of God that he's raised up. Of course, yeah, you'd want to say more, but that it just shows how it completely fits in with that theme.
yeah.
But yeah, this glory thing, I like it.
Yeah. And well, and there's no other path to glory except for going down to how far you go down to the bottom is how much you'll get glorified. So Christ went all the way down, low as you can go. And so he gets the most glory. And he came from the highest spot. And so and you can just see this in how
Job is a deconstructive text.
Yeah.
In that way.
Well, yeah, that's the thing is like, why did God have Job go through all that? You're like, well, it was for glory. The world is actually a better place because Job went through that. And you're like, why wouldn't it just be good if God didn't kill all his kids and destroy everything he owned? You're like, that's kind of stupid. You're like, well, you don't understand the pattern of going down and coming back up and facing Leviathan. It's better to go face Leviathan and conquer it and come back up. That's a better world than if you never faced Leviathan at all, because Leviathan's still there, kind of thing. It's like, what's you have the city and there's a dragon outside.
Yes.
Just leave the dragon alone, which is what happens most of the time. But there's one guy that's like, I'm going to go kill that dragon, because every now and then he comes and he snatches a person. You're like, we're done with that. We're done with people getting snatched. And so that the knight goes out there and, maybe some of them die. But the one guy goes out and he slays the dragon. Yeah. And what happens to that guy? That guy's a legend. It's more glorious, and the world's a better place now that the dragon slayed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
I see this in Christ's message too, where he always talks about, you have these sayings which are really tough, where he says, you can't serve God and mammon. If you don't hate your family, you're not worthy of me. There's others, but they don't come to mind right now. But this notion of there's things, and I get this from Kierkegaard also, where there's layers of separation between you and Christ. And what you have to continuously do is strip them away. You have to continue. Yeah, this is sort of the same notion of, how would we? Yeah, the more layers you strip away, the more you can reflect the image of Christ. And I think it's important to say here, there needs to be a goal to your stripping away. You sort of have to. It wouldn't work if there wasn't. You couldn't strip away the layers to get to Christ if Christ wasn't there, right? Yeah. Because you just tear yourself apart. And this is the notion of Christ is within you, and the seed that's inside of you, and there's something fundamentally good that needs to grow. And then what you have to do is both let that seed grow and also tear away your old self to let it shine forth, right?
Right. I mean, you can even think of that as like, I think about Peterson's example of what he talks about when you're growing up, and like when you're a child, you're all potential. Are you familiar with him talking about that, where he says, as a child, you're all potential. Like you could become anything, but you aren't anything. You haven't done anything. And then he says part of growing up and becoming a person is you have to dedicate yourself to maybe one thing.
Yeah.
So you become like, you go to school and become an engineer. You're like, I'm not going to be an artist or a doctor or a lawyer or I'm not going to go party. I'm going to do this one thing. I'm going to do engineering. And then you actually become someone. And that's almost like, you almost think of that as like a pattern of this, of like a child is almost anything. It's almost like a child is imminent in a way, and it has to go down as you grow up. You die to all those childhood things, and you become a certain person. And what you try to do is become a valuable person. And then from there, like, the world opens back up to you, because if you're really good at what you do, then like you'll be successful, and you'll have opportunities, and you'll make money, and people will like you. All this stuff, like, the world opens up, and I, that's almost like this kind of like this death, this descent, and then rebirth.
Well, it's also the paradox of positive and negative freedom, where, unlimited freedom, defined as we like to today, where it's just endless choice, actually limits your freedom. But if you constrain your freedom, the world opens up. So it's something similar there too.
Right. And I think it's also the same. Like, I get the same feeling. I don't know how to say it, from postmodernism. Like, postmodernism opens everything up, and everything becomes potential in it, but it's not anything. What you have to do is you have to force it down into something, and you have to it has to become something, and then from there, like, I mean, that type of pattern, like Jonathan Pajot would say, like that's it's a pattern of reality. That's just how reality is. Like, you see all these ways in which things are potential, then you pare it down to something, and then it becomes something. Like even just like the use of your day. Like, you could just sit in your bed and scroll through Facebook or Instagram, but that's nothing. And but if you did something with your day, like say you decided to build something in your garage, then you have something, and like something comes out of that day that didn't exist, and that maybe can be valuable or whatever. So like, I just see that pattern, and I just see it all as the same pattern of the eminent going down to the bottom, and then emerging up into something glorious, So it's a, from
new creation. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, new creation. That's 1
second. Let me go tell my kids to be quiet.
Okay. Yeah. Let me find this. Where did this go?
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's fine.
They were screaming shirtless wrestling, so that was in the limit.
Yeah. Where was I going to go now? Yeah. Just going to say that when I think about, my own deconstruction, it was really helpful for me to discover N.T. Wright. And I realized that his notion of new creation and heaven and earth coming together is, something that's been invaluable in this.
Right. So everyone got into heaven.
That when I then got into people like, Paul Vanderklay or Jonathan Pajot or Vervaeke now or Peterson, because that's the fundamental pattern. It's always this left right hemisphere, this heaven and earth, this order chaos. This dualism. Christianity is such a paradoxical, dualistic, non-dualistic thing where it's always you have to keep two things in tension. Where, for an example that I always have to deal with is, I'm part of a community that I have some kind of accountability to, but at the same time, I'm an individual, and I need to keep true to my conscience, keep true to the truth. And so there's always that dynamic between, the authority of the church and the conscience of the individual that you have to keep in this tension. You can't put one over the other, because if you put the individual over the church, I think you get something like the 50,000, the American Christianity in some sense, where it's maybe this isn't true, but each individual with his Bible is just creating a new church type of deal.
Yeah. Well, I think in some way, like, yeah. I mean, I agree. I think it's. I mean, if you have a strong center, you can keep things in line around it, in balance around it. But without a strong center, things will try to flip on top of each other. And, I just think about my own life, like I'll try to keep like maybe my family life in my time spent working. This is something I have to balance. And like, how do I determine whether, obviously it's very important for me to spend time with my family, but it's also, I gotta make money and do my work. But how do I balance these? What I put right in the center, I put the idea like, this is what it means to be a good father and provider. So
yes.
like this idea keeps these lined up to where I'm not just like, well, if I make enough money, this will pull my family up. I don't put I don't put work above my family because I somehow think money will make my family happy. But then I also don't put my family above work, where everything, I'm spending all my time,
Yep.
At their school and just hanging out with them all the time and never making any money, because then we lose our house and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, concepts like father, at least how you describe it, is sort of it's that place of that incarnational space between two opposites that.
Yeah. And I see that like Christ plays that. So Christ remains the center, and then you have underneath it like the church. And even though the churches may not agree on the things, you can balance them out. You don't have to play a power game with each other, because what's most important is the center, and we're all off by whatever. We're all down. We're not the center ourselves, and we'll never be. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it's a Protestant way of thinking about it.
I mean, I just in my own life when I'm like trying to figure stuff out, like if something's like unbalanced or whatever, like it's helpful to like think like, well, what's most important, and like how do I like having that, like just the idea of having a hierarchy is just so useful, and just being aware that the hierarchies are there and that you're using them.
At the same time, just to push back, I have a problem with this sort of Hegelianism that often gets smuggled in, where it's like, Christianity is always about finding the middle path. And, when you think about what Jesus represents, he's very radical.
I'm reading through the book of John, and there's nothing middle path about him going like, you have to eat my body and drink my blood. I'm like, Jesus, really? Do you have to, like, why are you saying this? You're making